having it in a hotel, having it in a blooming casino, whatever it is, whatever is you.
She is a podcast host of The Glam Reaper. She's an author, a TEDx speaker. She operates from Muldowney Memorials. I have the great pleasure today to introduce my friend, Jennifer Muldowney. So I'm really excited to speak to Jennifer today. Jennifer and I met in Baltimore at the NFDA convention in October in 2022. We shared lots of views and passions for the industry. So first, my question to you is about who you are and where you're based and what do you do?
Thank you, John. And it's so funny. I'm so used to being on the other end of this, being the moderator and the host. But thank you. That was a very generous introduction. And yes, we've lots of things in common, and we had great fun at the NFDA, as I always do, but yourself and Adam were great crack, as we say back home. But yeah, my name is Jennifer. I am otherwise known as the Glam Reaper, which cracks me up because I don't think I'm in any way glamorous in any way, shape or form. But that sort of originated from an English newspaper, I think it was The Sun, and I had released a book on funeral planning in Ireland. I was originally a wedding planner, and then two friends of mine passed away and just sort of started a trail of thought, I guess. And so I released a book called Safer While You're Away, and I just became a little bit more vocal on the funeral space. And so the news picked up on this and they nicknamed me the Glam Reaper, which I thought was hysterical. But having said that, it's a lot better than what I was getting in networking groups, which was I was known as the dead girl. When somebody from the funeral space, breaks into normal business networking things, with kind of like this person is making us talk about things we don't want to talk about. So anyway, I'll go with the Glam Reaper. It stuck. And I guess nearly a decade later, the Glam Reaper podcast was born during COVID. I manage, as you said, Muldowney Memorials here in New York, although we are global, and we do celebrant work, and we also are memorial planners.
So it's really interesting then. So your role, you will work alongside different funeral homes in supporting them with their services.
So I am not a licensed funeral director, nor do I want to be, and that means no disrespect to any funeral director. I think it's incredible what you guys do. I admire it so much, but I also am a firm believer in people should do what they're good at. Especially in the US, licensing is such a huge deal. It encompasses a lot, and I know for me, I would never feel comfortable with embalming or anything like that. So that kind of rules the whole licensure thing out for me. So just to, again, I don't know if your listeners would know, but a celebrant is like a priest but not a priest, or a rabbi but not a rabbi is the easiest way to describe it. And then for the memorial planning, it's like a wedding planner but for funerals.
When we met in Baltimore, we spoke a lot about a traditional funeral in America.
Yeah.
And you and I sort of both shared the view that a funeral service should be what the person wants, and it's about how the arranger explores and listens to what someone needs and then offers options accordingly. With where you're based in New York, what is a traditional funeral in America?
So a traditional funeral is still very much driven by your beliefs. So obviously a Jewish funeral is going to be quite different from your traditional Catholic. To me, that seems to be Ireland, the UK and the US quite follow that. It's in New York especially, and we kind of joke, I'm not American, obviously I'm Irish, but we joke that when you're here long enough, you become New York, that New York is quite different to the rest of the US. And so it is quite progressive. Do I believe what I'm doing here is, happening as much elsewhere? Probably not. But I do feel like because New York is such a melting pot of people, your religious beliefs become more fluid.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I was raised Catholic in Ireland. That's all I've ever known. But I personally don't want to have my funeral in a church. I know I don't go to Mass. Sorry, Gran, but I don't go to Mass. But I'll go to St. Patrick's Cathedral here in New York. I'll say prayers. I still have my beliefs. But I don't want my funeral to be just around some guy who never got to meet me from a pulpit, doing his Mass ritual. I want to control it. I want it to be music. I want it to be people who talk about me. And that's the trend I'm seeing, is that more people seem to be going for direct cremation. But direct cremation allows families to give them the space to maybe have a memorial when they're ready, as opposed to doing it in the 2 or 3 days that we do. Like, for example, this one I'm working on at the moment, the gentleman passed away and 3 days later we're having a giant memorial funeral for him. Going with direct cremation sometimes allows families that little bit of private grieving time, but also they can have something at a later date. And I think that's super important. I also think that, you know, with the celebrant work that I do, again, people will assume that it's not religious. It can be. And I've absolutely done services where we've incorporated religion massively. I've read prayers. I've done it, in fact, entire religious services. I've also done celebrant work with a rabbi and with religions, so that we've kind of had this hybrid. Maybe the person really believed in certain things, but they don't want to, again, have it in a church or a synagogue. They want to have it in a space that more represents them.
I also grew up in a Roman Catholic family. But again, I also share the view about my funeral service not being held in a Catholic church or in a church. I think what's really important, which you and I will see, are about how we break barriers down. Traditionally, you have the mourners, the next of kin, the family in that first pew. You have the priest, and then your loved one's coffin. The barriers between you and your loved one is how we break them down and make that funeral service about the person that's died. So, like as you said, it's not about, you know, from somebody else's perspective. It's about a connection, creating a connection.
It doesn't have to not include the religious aspect. I feel like people kind of sometimes they're a bit, oh, but you know, I want to be in a church because I want to make sure they go to heaven, or, you know, there's these beliefs that are set into us. And I think it's about showing people you can have all of it, you know.
Only a few years ago, we weren't allowed to have, in a Church of England service, we weren't allowed to have Mr. Brightside by the Killers as we left the church, because it was seen as not appropriate for church.
Yeah.
And I was literally banging my head against a wall going, no, it's not speaking ill of God. And this is where we need to move forwards, and where the church and religion needs to keep up, really, to ensure we understand what the funeral service is for and who it's for. Also as well, then, you mentioned direct cremation. So I have concerns over this. My concerns are about the physical contact with your loved one. We often undertake direct cremation where families will come to us here and they can even help load the coffin onto the vehicle. Quite often it's not taken up, but they're given the choice to do that. Do you think there are concerns about having an unattended direct cremation, even though memorial services which you do, they are meeting a needs, but that physical contact with your loved one, how important do you think that is? And are we missing something in not having that in a service?
So that's a really good point. And it's something that I talk to a couple of people about regularly, because I feel like this comes back to what I always say is to meet people where they're at. What's for you, John, is not going to be for me, and what's for me is not going to be for somebody else. So for example, I'm obviously here in New York, and so if a family member dies back at home, and I fly home, people assume because of what I do for a living that I'll want to see the body and I'll want to see the person. And actually, for me, I usually don't. I actually would rather remember the person laughing, the last time I spoke with them, their warmth. For me, the cold reality of death is really tough. And that's where I think a funeral helps, because a lot of people assume that I'm kind of trying to get rid of a funeral, and I'm not. I think it's so important to start that grieving process, because I think it just puts grief on hold if we don't have any farewell or anything. But for the actual physicality, and I've listened to you talking on so many things, especially when we were talking about the bereavement thing, it's so important for that option to be given to families. It's not for everyone, but it's so important for them to have that option. For me right now, from the majority of people, I don't need to see them.
Yeah.
But for my mum and dad, I feel like I may change that up.
I was with a family last week, and he compared direct cremation to something that he experienced when he got married. He and his wife had a church service, but they didn't want anyone there. And he said, actually, years later, I look back now, and I think what we missed was having the whole village there. It was about actually me taking this wife. You know, we are putting it out there. We belong to each other. You're watching this, guys. And so it's about that actual confirmation almost about what you're doing. There are comparisons to direct cremation. So you're actually going there to physically say goodbye as well, which is a really interesting, I hadn't heard that before, but I thought it was a really interesting comparison. I interviewed Julia Samuels, MBE, a few weeks ago as well. That was really interesting. Again, you and I share the vision about a funeral service being positive, and despite it being hard, it can be really uplifting and empowering. And she actually sort of challenged me by saying that she thinks it's important not to make it all too much fun, and that actually there should be elements of sadness as well.
I love that. So actually, I get that an awful lot when I meet with families. So I work with all different ranges of families here in New York, and some of them are very well-to-do and they have their own family event planners, which is wild. They have staff, So I've actually had some of them say, well, Jen, couldn't we use our wedding planner or a family event planner or a business event planner or whatever? I say this to them and I mean it with every breath. And I've also had clients come back to me and say, Jen, yes, which is, yes, can any event planner do a memorial logistically? 100%. It's very similar, a wedding and a funeral, right? Logistically. But where I come in and my 15 years of expertise and funeral directors and everything is there is a fine line between celebrating a life and mourning a loss. And it is so important to get that balance right. Like, so important. I exactly said this to the family. It's not about having a party. Some of the most flamboyant characters where, it's just been all color and Broadway and, just flamboyancy everywhere. But it's so important, whether it's in another room where maybe the person is, or it's where the service is happening. It's so important to have a space where people can feel like they can cry, feel like they can breathe, feel like they can feel their heart being
Acknowledge.
Exactly. One of my favorite services that I talk about, every color of the rainbow, there was gay music playing, it was Broadway tunes. Oh, it was just a party. And then we requested everyone to move upstairs into this other room. Every flower was white, there was candlelight. The music was just instrumental and low. All the lights were dimmed. And that's where we had the service. Then when the service was finished, we invited everyone to go back downstairs when they were ready. Yeah. They wanted to go back down to the party. And so many people stayed. So many people wanted to stay in that quiet serenity and just be there with him and with their memories.
It's great because, again, people get confused with their feelings and emotions around a funeral. And like literally, you are creating spaces to explore these emotions and feelings in.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've got that in the UK. I think in the UK, it's quite a neutral clinical space. And some crematoriums are getting better now and allowing you how to personalize that space, even allowing pets in there and doing more things, which is great. But I think you actually doing and creating the environment to match the mood and to actually match those feelings is fantastic, really.
It's really just about being a human being, John. It's about just seeing people, listening to what they're saying to you. I want people to celebrate the 40 years they've had me as opposed to the 60 odd they won't. I want to be celebrated, but at the same time, there's a loss and you can't dance over.
You can't ignore it. So what all this ties into nicely, it all ties into education, doesn't it? How we improve our world's relationship with death, which some nations have got in a real strong abundance and how they acknowledge it and talk about it. But you and I have spoken about the US and the UK, about how we improve our relationship with death. And we've spoken about bereavement awareness in schools. And it's actually interesting now we've hit the target for the petition. People in America are starting to sit up now as well with this. So what's your view then, Jennifer, about how discussing bereavement awareness in schools can help people moving forward?
I'm so happy you got your petition. I mean, you exceeded your expectations, which is amazing. I think it's so important. And I understand where sort of teachers feel like there's an added pressure onto them. But I think as long as there's either outside training, these teachers don't have to parent our children. I think certain amount of this responsibility does lie in the home as much as it does in schools.
Just to interrupt you really quickly, just so people are watching this going, yeah, she's right. I've got an answer for that. So people like Child Bereavement UK, Project Eileen and other charities already have the learning materials for schools. So for example, you can put videos on which explains the story for age appropriate levels. So I just want to answer that really quickly.
But I do. I think it's so important. We do sex education, so why shouldn't we have death education? It's literally a part of life. You may never have sex in your life, but you're going to die. So
yeah.
You're born. There's only one way out of here. So I think it's so important to educate. And what I really loved about what you've kind of been preaching is it gives space for people to comfort each other as well. It's not just the knowledge about death, it's really about the knowledge about grief, because even I know when we had to put our dog down, and that happened around the same time I lost my friends and stuff. At the time anyway, you didn't have a funeral really for your dog, and that was kind of a thing you did. But then my friends and sort of people around me didn't know how to deal with me. They're like, do we send flowers, a card? Like, what do you do? But I was brokenhearted. Like I'd lost a sibling, you know. So like a child, for example, in school could lose a dog. Their dog could die, and another child could lose a sibling. They could feel the grief just as powerful. We have to take that judgment off the table that, it's just a dog, or it was just your cousin, or it was just your uncle, or whatever it is. That judgment doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve anybody. Whatever you're feeling is whatever you're feeling. And whether it's dramatic or whatever way you're dealing with it is your grief. And I really believe that.
And that's it. And what we can give children at a young age and give them those tools and knowing how to communicate and that compassion and empathy, that can see them through to adulthood as well, and knowing how to communicate with their friends because they're not sure what to say.
Yeah. I find most of my clients love me because I'm normal with them. I talk to them like they're a human being.
You listen. That brings me nicely on to my sort of final point today, really, Jennifer. So I think it's really interesting what you're doing. You've got your podcast, you're getting information out there, you're educating people, you're changing, and you're allowing people to change to do what they want to do in the funeral service. What is your mission? What do you want to achieve? What's your reason why? What's your objective?
Oh, that is a tough one. My objective is honestly, it's going to sound a bit corny, but is nearly back to my first book. It's really, that's what drove me, is allowing people to say farewell their way. Not your way, not my way, not the priest's way or the rabbi's way or the funeral director who needs to make a sale or is having a bad day, but is to say farewell your way. And what I even mean by that is pre-planning. And I am such an advocate of pre-planning. Yeah. So even if it's putting down a couple of lines on a piece of paper that you want burial, cremation, body composting, all these other options that are coming out now, even if you don't want it to be in a church, or you do want it to be in your local nightclub, or you don't want it to be here, but just even if you choose a couple of lines, and I do workshops on this now as well, because I'm just such an advocate of pre-planning. Like, for example, you're John, you're a husband, you're a father, but you're a father to each child differently. You're a brother, you're a son, you're a million different things to a million different people. When you go, one person, technically, maybe two, will be responsible for your funeral. Yeah. But they're going to do it from their point of view. So you're not getting to say farewell your way. And I think you need to be represented because all of your facets are so different. Classic case of this that I'm always bringing my mum into it, bless her. When I sat down and did my pre-plan with her, we cried, we laughed. It was the most beautiful bonding. I would have played Wind Beneath My Wings at her funeral because that's what she is. She wants Rod Stewart's Maggie May, and her name's not even Maggie or May. Like, what the Lord? But it's her song, and she knows her friends that'll mean something to them. That's my objective, is getting to say farewell their way. So whether it's using a celebrant, going to your traditional funeral, doing the church thing, having it in a hotel, having it in a blooming casino, whatever it is, whatever is you.
Amazing. I thank you for what you're doing. It's amazing work, and we need more of this, don't we? We need more education out there to show the public it can be done, and actually don't be scared of it. So thank you, Jennifer, for all you're doing. I think it's really exciting what you're doing. We'll leave you now to set up your memorial service there, and it's been fantastic to speak to you, so thank you.
I'd say a huge thank you for watching the podcast today. Please subscribe to the channel as we have some fascinating guests lined up. And please be part of this special journey. Thank you.